The day Elliot Osei-Brathwaite walked into Meridian Capital Group's Toronto headquarters, he wore a gray wool coat that cost more than most people's rent. Nobody asked him where he got it. Nobody asked him anything. The receptionist looked up, looked past him, and went back to her screen. He had flown in from Vancouver that morning. He had a 9 a.m. meeting with the senior partners. He had built 3 companies from nothing, sold 2 of them, and turned the third into a firm that managed north of $400 million in assets across Western Canada. He was 51 years old, and he had heard the silence before. That particular kind of silence that lands on a black man in a room full of people who have already decided what he is. Elliot sat down in the lobby and waited. 3 months earlier, a junior analyst named Trip Halford had been telling people at Meridian that the firm was about to land the big fish. He said it with the confidence of someone who has never had to prove himself in a room, only show up in one. Trip Halford was 29, the son of a Bay Street partner, and the kind of man who talked about merit with a straight face. The big fish was Osei-Brathwaite Capital. The deal was a potential merger. Meridian absorbing the Western portfolio, Elliot joining as a senior partner, his client network folding into theirs. On paper, it was the most significant transaction Meridian had negotiated in a decade. Trip Halford had never looked up what Elliot Osei-Brathwaite looked like. Neither had most of the partners. Meridian's senior floor was 62 floors above King Street West, and it had the kind of quiet that money buys. Thick carpet, no echoes, light that came in sideways and made everything look important. The partners gathered in the main boardroom at 9:15, 8 of them. Water glasses, leather chairs, a projector screen with Osei-Brathwaite Capital's logo on it. Elliot was shown in by the receptionist, who introduced him as your 9 o'clock without giving his name. Trip Halford, sitting near the door, stood up immediately. He reached past Elliot and extended his hand toward the white man who had walked in 2 paces behind. Elliot's legal counsel, a quiet man named Weston, who carried a briefcase and had said almost nothing since the airport. "Mr. Osei-Brathwaite," Trip said, shaking Weston's hand. "Really glad you could make it up from Vancouver." Weston looked at his own hand, then looked at Elliot. Elliot said nothing. He walked to the head of the table, the chair that had been set for the guest, the one facing the partners, and he sat down. He placed his portfolio on the table. He poured himself water from the carafe. The room went through a particular kind of recalibration. You could almost hear it, like a record skipping, then finding the groove again. "Apologies," Trip said, sliding into his chair. His face had gone the color of a boiled prawn. "I thought we can get started," Elliot said. His voice was low, unhurried. The voice of a man who has made his peace with rooms like this. The meeting lasted 2 hours. What happened inside it, partner by partner, is worth understanding. Because this is not a story about one bad moment. It is a story about accumulation, about the particular weight that settles on a man's shoulders when he is asked to prove himself not once, not twice, but in every sentence, every pause, every time someone's eyes slide to his legal counsel instead of to him. Franklin Bouchard, the managing partner, spoke to Elliot with careful, measured politeness, the kind that has a ceiling on it. He complimented the Vancouver market. He called Osei-Brathwaite Capital a solid regional shop. He used the word regional 4 times in 90 minutes. Regional. A firm with $430 million in assets under management. Offices in Vancouver, Calgary, and a new one opening in Halifax. A client list that included 2 of the largest Indigenous-owned resource companies in British Columbia and a pension fund that Meridian had been trying to get a meeting with for 3 years. Regional. Elliot wrote nothing down. He did not react. He answered questions with precision and offered numbers when numbers were needed, and when Trip Halford interrupted him mid-sentence, twice, to redirect the question to Weston, Elliot simply waited, then answered anyway. The second time, Trip did it. One of the other partners, a woman named Ingrid Lafleur, put her pen down quietly on the table. She was watching. The lunch break was 40 minutes. Elliot was shown to a smaller room with a sandwich platter and a view of the lake. Weston sat across from him and said, without looking up from his phone, "You want to walk?" "No," Elliot said. "They're going to lowball the valuation." "I know." Franklin already signaled it, the regional comment. Elliot picked up half a sandwich. "I know what the comment was." Weston was quiet for a moment. "How do you want to play the afternoon?" Elliot looked out at Lake Ontario, gray and wide and indifferent. He had grown up 2 hours from this city. in a small house in Hamilton where his father had worked the night shift at a steel plant for 23 years. His father had told him once that the furnace didn't care who you were, it just wanted feeding. Elliot had thought about that sentence his whole adult life. "Same as the morning," he said. "We let them show us who they are." The afternoon session began with Meridian's formal proposal. Franklin Bouchard presented it with a slideshow. The valuation they placed on Osei-Brathwaite capital was $62 million. Elliot had brought his own valuation, independent, commissioned 3 months prior from a firm in Montreal that had no relationship with either party. He slid a bound copy across the table to Franklin Bouchard without comment. The independent valuation was $119 million. The boardroom went quiet in a different way from before. Not the silence of assumption, the silence of arithmetic. Trip Halford reached for the document. Elliot moved it 6 inches further from his reach without looking at him. He kept his eyes on Franklin Bouchard. "I'd like to walk you through Section 3, Elliot said. "The pension fund relationships in particular." By 3 o'clock, the dynamic in the room had shifted the way a ship shifts when the weight on its deck is redistributed. Slowly, then all at once. Ingrid Lafleur had been asking questions for an hour. Not hostile questions, specific ones. She had a background in institutional investing, and she had recognized, early in the afternoon session, that Elliot Osei-Brathwaite had done something unusual. He had spent 4 years quietly building relationships with clients that every major Bay Street firm had wanted, and none of them had managed to land. Not through connections, not through the right school, the right club, the right summer cottage on the right lake. Through time. Through showing up when other people sent assistance. Through knowing the file. "The Thunderbird Nation pension," she said, leaning forward. "That's $140 million in assets, 162 as of last quarter," Elliot said. "They've turned down RBC. They've turned down CIBC. They've turned down us." She paused. "Why you?" It was the first honest question anyone had asked him all day. Elliot considered it. "I went to their council meeting in December 2019. There was a storm, and my flight was canceled, so I drove. 8 hours. I showed up at 7 in the morning, and I sat in the back of the room, and I listened for 4 hours before I said anything." He paused. They weren't looking for a firm. They were looking for someone who understood what stewardship means. The room was very quiet. "I understood," he said, "because I was raised by someone who did." Here is what Trip Halford did not know, and what the partners were beginning to understand. Elliot Osei-Brathwaite had not come to Toronto to be absorbed. He had come to see if Meridian was worth acquiring. The distinction is not subtle once you see it, but it is invisible to people who have never considered that the person across the table might be the one holding the door. The bound document Elliot had placed in front of Franklin Bouchard that morning, the portfolio overview, the client list, the performance record, contained in its final appendix, a detail that no one had yet reached. A letter of interest from a pension board in Ottawa that was looking to consolidate its external management. The board managed $2.3 billion. $2.3 billion. Meridian's total AUM was just under $2 billion. Franklin Bouchard found the appendix at 4:17 in the afternoon. Elliot knew the moment he found it, because Bouchard's reading glasses came off his nose, and he set them down very carefully on the table, as though he needed his hands to be occupied with something small and manageable. Trip Halford was checking his phone. Ingrid Lafleur was already looking at Elliot. "The Ottawa board," Franklin said. "The Ottawa board," Elliot confirmed. "Is this?" Franklin stopped, started again. "Is this a current conversation?" "It became current in September," Elliot said. "They reached out to us. We've had 4 meetings." He paused. "They want a firm that can grow with them. They've been watching the sector for 2 years. And you've been," Franklin gestured vaguely at the room, at the meeting, at all of it. "Evaluating my options," Elliot said. "Yes." There was a long silence. The kind that happens when a room full of people realizes simultaneously that they have been operating on incorrect assumptions. Franklin Bouchard cleared his throat. Trip Halford had put his phone face down on the table. One of the other partners, a quiet man named Cedric, who had barely spoken all day, let out a breath through his nose that was almost a laugh. Ingrid Lafleur said, "What would it take for you to stay in this conversation?" And Elliot Osei-Brathwaite looked at her, at the one person in the room who had asked him a straight question before it became necessary, and he said, "A real number, and an equal seat." They broke at 4:45. Elliot and Weston stood at the elevator. The carpet absorbed their footsteps. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass, Toronto spread out below them, lake gray and enormous, and going about its business without any awareness of what had just happened on the 62nd floor. "They'll call tomorrow," Weston said. "They'll call tonight," Elliot said. The elevator arrived. They stepped in. The doors closed. Franklin Bouchard called at 7:12 that evening. Elliot was at the hotel restaurant, eating a properly mediocre bowl of French onion soup and reading a report on Q3 infrastructure returns. He let it ring twice before he answered. The conversation was 23 minutes long. By the end of it, Meridian had revised its valuation to $111 million, not the full number, but a genuine one, and proposed a structure in which Elliot would come in as a named equity partner, not a senior advisor, not a regional lead. Not any of the careful, soft-pedaled titles that mean you are at the table but not of it. A partner, with a partner's vote and a partner's stake. It was not everything. Elliot knew it was not everything. There would be other rooms, other silences, other moments when someone's hand would go past him toward the white man standing at his shoulder. He was 51 years old, and he had no illusions about that. But it was a real seat, and he had earned it with receipts. Not with charm, not with patience performed for an audience, but with 4 years of showing up in storms, of knowing the file, of understanding that stewardship is not a word you put in a brochure. It is a thing you do at 7 in the morning in someone else's community when no one is watching, and it does not benefit you directly, and you do it anyway. The following week, Trip Hafford sent Elliot a LinkedIn connection request with a note that said, "Great meeting you last week. Would love to connect and learn more about your journey." Elliot left it unread. There are some things you do not owe a man just because he has decided to be friendly once the numbers have spoken for you. The Ottawa Pension Board announced their new external management partner in the spring. The press release was 4 paragraphs long and mentioned Osei-Brathwaite Capital by name, which meant it mentioned Elliot's name, which meant it ran in the report on business, and was picked up by 2 financial newsletters and 1 podcast that covered Bay Street. His father called him from Hamilton that afternoon. 77 years old, still in the same house, still with the same voice, a voice that had always sounded like it came from somewhere deeper than a single lifetime. "I saw the paper," his father said. "I know," Elliot said. "They spelled your name right." "They did." A pause. His father made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite something else. "Good," he said. "Make sure they keep doing that." Ingrid Lafleur became, over the following year, one of Elliot's genuine allies inside Meridian. Not a sponsor. That word is too transactional. But a colleague in the real sense. Someone who called things what they were in meetings, who noticed when the room was doing the thing rooms do, who pushed back on it with a directness that cost her something, and she paid it anyway. She told Elliot once, over coffee on a Tuesday in February, that she had almost said something during Tripp's second interruption in the morning session. Almost. "Why didn't you?" Elliot asked. She held her cup with both hands. "I didn't know yet if you needed me to." Elliot nodded slowly. "And by the afternoon?" "By the afternoon," she said. "It was clear you didn't." He appreciated the honesty of that more than he could say. There is a particular grace in a person who recognizes the difference between help and interference, who understands that stepping forward is not always the same as standing up. Sometimes the most useful thing one person can do for another is witness what is happening and name it when the time comes, and know that their job was not to rescue but to record. Elliot had recorded his own story for 4 years. He had recorded it in client files and performance reports, an evaluation document from a Montreal firm that had no dog in the fight. He had recorded it in 8 hours of winter highway and a council room where he sat quietly for 4 hours and learned what it meant to earn trust rather than assume it. The boardroom on the 62nd floor had tried to tell a different story about him. The kind of story that is not told in sentences, told in the flick of an eye, in a handshake meant for someone else, in the word regional repeated 4 times in 90 minutes. He had walked in with his own document. He had laid it on the table. He had let the numbers speak in a language that the room could not ignore. There is a courtyard at the base of the Meridian building, between the tower and the parking structure, where office workers eat lunch in warmer months. In March, it is empty and windy and smells of cold concrete and bus exhaust. Elliot passed through it on his way to the parking garage the evening of that first meeting, the evening of the phone call, the revised number, the real seat. He stopped for a moment, just stood there in his gray wool coat, the city going past on all sides. Somewhere above him, 62 floors up, a boardroom full of partners were recalibrating what they thought they knew. He thought about his father's furnace. It just wants feeding. He had fed it. Year after year, in cities they expected him not to be in meetings where the handshake went past him, in rooms where the silence landed on him like weather. He had fed it with work, with the particular, unglamorous, undeniable weight of work. And the furnace had answered. He put his hands in his pockets and walked to the car. He had a flight to Vancouver in the morning. There was a quarterly review to prepare, a client call at noon, and a new partner in Halifax who needed an onboarding conversation and a good reason to trust the firm she'd just joined. He was not done. He had never expected to be done. But somewhere between the lobby that morning, where the receptionist had looked past him, and the phone call at 7:12, something had shifted, not the world. The world does not shift for one man's dignity on a Tuesday. But the record had shifted. And the record, Elliot Osei-Brathwaite had learned, is the only thing a room full of people cannot talk their way around once you have laid it on the table and stood behind it without apology. He drove north on Bay Street as the city lit up around him, quiet and enormous and full of rooms like that one. Rooms he had not yet entered, rooms that had already made their assumptions. Rooms where the handshake would go past him, and the silence would land like weather, and someone would say regional or junior, or perhaps you'd like to start as an advisor. As though the word advisor is not the older cousin of invisible. He drove north and he thought, let them. Let them set the table however they want. He knew how to bring the document.